In this lecture, we're going to talk a little bit about game design and how to make decisions on your indie game project. Specifically, we're talking about onion design. Now, there's some common development questions that I see all the time, particularly with people who are starting out making games. Things like, what features should I include in my game? And where should I start my development? What thing do I start with? What are my priorities? What if I run out of time or money, if that might be the case? And when should I stop? When is my game finished or good enough? Well, for me, I keep coming back to this philosophy of onion design, which is basically saying identify your single most important feature in your game. What's the thing that you have to have and you can't make the game without? And then figure out what's the second most important feature. And then what's the third most important feature? And you can see each of these is layering on top of the onion. So right in the middle of your onion, you have the core, the thing you have to have, and then layer and layer and layer. And it might get to the point where you have enough time and money and interest to have 10 of these layers on your onion. But at any point in time, if you run out of time, you say, well, I've got in the top 3 features, so now is a good time to stop. Or it might be top 4 features or top 5, whenever it is when you reach that point. And the critical thing here is each time you think, should I add this next feature, you ask yourself, will it make my core feature better? So all of these need to be feeding in to make it better. We don't take the time and effort to implement something just because it's nifty or cool. It has to make our game better, our core feature better. So if we look at some possibilities for the game we're working on at the moment, Project Boost, we could have fuel, we could have shooting, we could have power-ups. There's a lot of things that we have in here that we could say that would be cool. And I'm sure you could sit down and come up with another 5 cool features that you could put into this type of game, because if you've thought about games, if you're interested in games, you've got a lot of ideas. But the reality is we just can't implement everything. So I've got a challenge for you. It's to sketch out our onion design. Specifically, what do you believe is the single most important feature of the game that we're working on, that I told you in the last video what the game design was for this game? What do you think is the most important thing we absolutely have to have if we don't have anything else? And then what is the next most important feature? And then what is the third most important feature? Just so you're really, really clear what I mean by features or mechanics, it's moving is a feature, power-ups is a feature, getting from A to B and having it start a new level is a feature, moving obstacles is a feature, fuel is a feature. So this is what I mean by feature. So take a moment and write down what you think are 1, 2, and 3 of the most important things for our particular game. Okay, hopefully you've taken that on. Let me tell you what I think and what I'm going to be implementing in this section of the course. I think the most important feature is moving, or we can call it flying, but it's movement of the player. And nearly always in a game, it's going to be movement, because you kind of can't have a game if your player can't move, right? It's really critical. And it could be, if we only did moving, if moving was such a joy, so much fun, that could be the entire game. It's probably not going to be, but it's a possibility, right? And then I think the next most important thing is collision with the world, being able to have the player die somehow, have some consequences to your actions. So movement might be great and fun, but you have to have something to avoid. Those two are the top 2. And then the third for me in my game is level progression, or else my game's going to be very stale. If you're just doing the same thing over and over and over, we need to have a goal. We need to have the player feel like they're getting through something. So moving, most important, being able to bump into things and die, second most important, and being able to progress, have a goal, go from level 1, 2, 3, 4, so on is the third. And you know what? If we were to have enough time, I might say that for example, a fuel mechanic might be next, and then having enemies might be next, and shooting might be after that. So you by no means have to stop at 3. You can keep going and going and going. But I would recommend when you're working on your project, you think about starting with the most important first. And just one last thing before I wrap up this lecture is there's a lot of people that have the philosophy of do the thing that's most risky. Normally, if people have their programmer hat on, they're like, oh, I don't even know if I can do this particular thing. Let's do that first. That's okay, but it doesn't make your game. If you go and de-risk the most difficult or challenging or worrisome thing, you still might not end up with a compelling, interesting game. So I tend to take a designer philosophy, which is, the fuel mechanic might be really risky, but we might not even need to do it. let's do the most important thing first, which is flying. Once we've done that, we can do the next and next, and then maybe we get to the fuel mechanic, which we think is really risky and difficult, and we might not even be able to do anyway. So that's just my thoughts on that for anyone out there who's worked on a team where the programming frame of mind is let's de-risk things. This is the game design approach to making indie games. So there we go. If you've got any questions, then feel free to throw them in the Q&A in the discussions. I'll see you in the next lecture.